Hello, good morning. I'm just looking at our colleagues that are at the IT. Is it okay? We can start? Everything is okay? Anna, we are online, everything is okay? Okay. So, hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here in this rainy day in Tirana, and also to our invitees and panelists that are yeah, that are in their own Christian, Valeska, Yorida, everybody. Well, I will not mention all the names, but we are very happy that you are here with us. We will immediately go into the issues that we will discuss today. To my best of knowledge, this is among the first events that we'll discuss the takeaways from what has been happening during the second semester of 2022. We are very happy and privileged to have with us such a distinguished panel. I will present them in due time. Just one thing about the goal. We will discuss here about the real implications on the ground, what we call the policy-making component. We will not talk about what is the Berlin process, etc., etc. We have gone past this phase. This is the first thing. Second, after the welcoming address from Mr. Fiesinger from Hans Seidel Stiftung, we will have Ambassador Zingraf to address us and show a little bit what are the German official, the first part, because the second part will be afterwards, view on what has been happening. And afterwards, we'll continue with the panel. And after the panel presentation, we will have an open discussion with people that are physically present in here, and also with our friends and colleagues that follow us online. Just a short presentation. People that are present in Albania, in here around the table physically, are represented in a big part by practitioners, people that are in the institution, civil servants that will follow the implementation of these three agreements. So, without much ado, I leave the floor to Mr. Fiesinger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hatschkai. Welcome to all panelists and participants from my side, from the side of Hans Seidel Foundation. It's a special pleasure for me to welcome among us also the German ambassador, Mr. Zingraf. As you know, Germany is the motor, the accelerator of the Berlin process since 2014, initiated and inspired by Chancellor Merkel, revitalized by Chancellor Scholz, and so it is only logical consequence that the German ambassador is giving us some impression and opinion about the last summit. My special thanks is also going, of course, to Cooperation and Development Institute, represented by my friend Arjan Hatschkai, who, and this is really worth to say, initiated the Tirana Connectivity Forum, and together with us, with Hans Seidel Foundation's Tirana office, represented by Mrs. Moscow, also in the former years, many cross-border activities, especially according to the youth, mentioning the special Connecting Youth program since 2017. Today, of course, we are looking on the takeaways of the last summit, and I think we are all agreeing that this brought really some new impact to us. Impact according to improvement of regional cooperation here in the Western Balkans, but also hopefully some impact of acceleration of European integration, and both, as you know, our targets are the intention of the Berlin process. There is some interconnections, and today, as it was just mentioned, the expert who actively were participating on the last summit will tell us about the signed three agreements. This is clear, which must be ratified, of course, in the respective parliaments. Are some decisive progress progress and step forward according to the four freedoms of European Union: movement of goods, services, capital, and people. And that means, of course, also some push up of the common regional market. But let me, as some representative of NGO, also emphasize the decisive element of the process, the role of civil societies. Mr. Hagemann from Südosteuropa Gesellschaft will tell us about this. As we all know, the Berlin process not only some intergovernmental approach, it is some approach of the whole society, and so it is clear that NGOs take an important role and part, and Hanns Seidel Foundation, together with CDI, from the first moment supported this process, not only mentally but actively by many seminars and cross-border activities, as just said, and I think Mr. Hatschkai can give the evidence about that. So we have an interesting conference in front of us, and I will put forward now to the German ambassador. Thanks.
The floor is yours, Mr. Zingraf. It is the start of the process. It started in Berlin, so.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm presently busy preparing the visit of Chancellor Scholz, who will join the EU Western Balkan Summit on the 6th of December. And I was thinking back at the visit of Chancellor Merkel a year ago in September, which caught us by surprise, I must say. Not surprised that she was engaged in the region, but that she would make the effort 2-3 weeks before the end of her term to come to the region was a surprise for us, and came on short notice. And I think that was a very strong documentation on her, not only strategic commitment, but on her personal commitment as well. And if you remember, she did it, she came to Tirana, but not as a bilateral visit, but as the regional visit, and met here the 6 heads of government of the 6 Western Balkan countries. So the Berlin process initiated by her accompanied her to the very end of her term, and I think it's difficult to overestimate what this Berlin process has done. And I remember that Prime Minister Rama publicly and privately has stated this many times in putting on the road a regional, let's say, process of regularly talking to each other. And I would like to believe that it helped greatly to put the strategic importance of the region for the European Union firmly on the map in a time when the accession process proper was not speeding up, to put it mildly. So when Chancellor Merkel left office, we were all very curious to see how this would be going on, because a strength of the process, which some people saw as a weakness, but I see it as a strength, was the informality. It needed to stay informal, in my opinion, because it could not be a competitor to the formal process driven by Brussels of enlargement and of accession to the Union. And this informal process needed personal commitment. So we were pretty certain that, independently of the result of our elections last year, there would be commitment, but how and when it could be formed and could be worked out, that was the great question. And then from our regional perspective, it was good to see that in the coalition agreement of the new coalition led by the Social Democrats, the Western Balkans was firmly on the map, and the Chancellor received Prime Minister Rama fairly early in Berlin this year, and even in the conditions of the Russian war, the Chancellor and the Foreign Minister traveled to the region. So all was good, and then came the signal that the Chancellor wanted to actively continue the Berlin process, and he did so, and a lot of effort and work and political weight went into the preparation, and I think the three agreements are the top of what was to be had by this process. And we have Odeta Barulushi here, who is a witness of first order of the effort that went in, and I think the nomination of our special envoy, Mr. Sarrazin, was key to that, because obviously the Chancellor and his Chancellery, which is not a very big body, cannot drive this. So to have somebody there who was in the negotiations all the time was, I think, crucial. So in my opinion, the three agreements are really the cornerstone of what was achieved. And when I think back, even 2 months before the Berlin summit, those who really were into the matter were quite skeptical. And I remember talks here where the government was saying, yes, we are working, we are contributing and working on it, but if we have one agreement, that would already be a great achievement and a very good precedence. Now we have 3, and so that was one, and the traditional elements of the Berlin process have been continued, so civil society implication and other focal points in this year, obviously energy, and due to good coincidences and coordination, not by the Berlin process, but in the context of the Berlin process, in the timely context of the Berlin process, and the trip to the region by Mrs. von der Leyen, the European Union could demonstrate that the Western Balkans are not left alone. So this was a very good sign, and in hard currency as well, and a strong support for the energy, for the financial energy needs of the 6 countries. So I'm very happy to have seen this, because I still remember the beginning of the COVID pandemic, where the European Union was a bit slow. I mean, we caught up on that, but we were slow in the beginning, which gave Prime Minister Rama the chance to talk about it for 2 years. He had a point, but he kept on repeating it. So this time this is not feasible, and I'm very happy that the European Union didn't repeat the error, and communication and substance was early on, which is very good. So I'm very curious to listen into your discussions, because if major takeaways are the 3 agreements, I'm really interested in your analysis how these agreements will be ratified and implemented, because they are on paper right now, and if we look together at what is happening between Kosovo and Serbia at the moment, I'm not so sure. So this is a key element, I think, of what's going to come, and I'm very curious to listen in. I might have to leave a bit early, because I'm preparing the Chancellor's visit, and at the same time I'm preparing the visit of our federal president, who is coming even before the Chancellor for a 2-day visit. So I'm a bit busy, and please bear with me if I leave a bit earlier than I would like to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I mean, it is true. I mean, you have had one of the most intense times in Tirana of the German ambassador, because everybody's coming in Tirana those days. So, and we are happy about it. We are very happy about it. Just to mention one point. The first one is that now we reached one agreement. Before we reached one agreement, now we have three, but we need to implement them. It is exactly what you mentioned, Mr. Ambassador. And the other point is that the Berlin process in the beginning was about setting up institutions. We all remember RICO or Western Balkan Investment Chamber. Now we are reaching agreements that are signed among all the countries of the Western Balkans, and which is fantastic finally. And now we are going to look forward for their implementation. The next part will be the intervention of the panelists. We have separated them in three groups. The first group, the first one will be Ms. Schütte, who is from Regional Cooperation Council, the technical body behind these agreements. We are very happy, and kudos to you for this fantastic achievement. And you will tell us what are the next steps. We know what the agreements are: identity cards, university degrees, professional qualifications. We don't need to talk about this. All what we want to know is what is the next step, when they should be adopted to the parliamentary, to the national law configuration, to the national order. I mean, what are the investments that each country needs to do, etc., etc. On the second part, we will talk about the institutional angle. Here, we are very happy to have with us Ms. Barbulushi, who is the advisor to Albanian Prime Minister for these issues, and the thinking head behind all this approach, and also Ms. Valeska Esch, who is senior advisor of German special envoy to WB6, Mr. Sarrazin, and who is one of the best specialists in Germany about the Western Balkans. On the third part, and this will be among the best ones, will be, because it's about us, will be what the think tanks and civil society organizations can do. And I believe that we can do a lot, because now it's time when we are not only beneficiaries, but we are reliable and partners with agency. Without much ado, the floor is to you, Ms. Schütte. I repeat my question: what are the next steps, what the governments should do for these three agreements not to remain on paper?
Good morning, everyone. I hope you hear me well.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for the invitation. It is absolutely a great pleasure for me to attend this roundtable. And before answering to your question, maybe just a little bit of context. Before the signature, and don't worry, I won't enter into this historical background, but just to put it in the context. Before the signature of these three mobility agreements, maybe from the outside look, could be considered as a very quiet period in the regional cooperation. But this can be only an outside impression, as a matter of fact, because in the past 2 years, we were very hard at work with the regional governments and with our partners on the three RCC coordinated mobility agreements. And we are, of course, very proud that after 2 years of hard work and intensive negotiations to get the consensual versions, we succeeded in delivering to the citizens of the region a key milestone toward real freedom of movement, which is, of course, the cornerstone and the prerequisite for the common regional market. This was, of course, made possible because of the commitment of the Western Balkan governments and the great support from the German government and the European Commission that were there since the very start of the process. The implementation of this breakthrough, I would say, agreements will very much bring their own benefits in the ground, also like the green lanes before and the regional roaming agreements. As regards the question, I'm pretty sure that you all are informed that North Macedonia is acting as a depository of the three agreements. North Macedonia has already shared the final official agreements with all the relevant institutions of Western Balkans economies in order for them to initiate the internal procedures foreseen by the respective constitutional framework for the ratification of such agreements. When it comes to the timeline, it is a bit difficult to predict an exact timeline. This because each of the economies have their own procedures, and subsequently the different time might have different timelines. But what it is important is that all the Western Balkans economies have clearly expressed their commitment to finalize such procedures as soon as possible. In the meanwhile, RCC has been very active and will of course continue to do so in facilitating as much as possible this process. So in this context, we have been constantly informing the national parliaments, but also other relevant stakeholders on the common regional market, but especially on the mobility agreements, their benefits and the necessity to swiftly adopt them. Also, if you would allow me very briefly to inform you on some procedural aspects that are taking place in parallel with the ratification of the agreements. First of all, with regard to the agreement on recognition of higher education qualifications, we will fully functionalize the regional recognition database, including training of relevant institutions to use the database, and will prepare the draft rules of procedure for the joint committee. Similarly, the draft rules of procedures for the joint RCC-CEFTA working group on recognition of professional qualification will also be prepared. And we are also supporting the preparation of the rules of procedure for the committee that is tasked with monitoring the application and implementation of the ID cards agreements. These are, as I said, procedural technical steps, but that will have a great importance for the proper implementation and application of the agreements after their entrance into force. So this would be all for now from my side.
Thank you very much, Orida. It is very interesting. If I may just note for our auditors that the North Macedonia is a repository of all these agreements, and they are taking care of its, let's say, follow-up with Western Balkan 6. And now the RCC is continuing to work with the technical side, and you are in contact, if I know this well, with the national parliaments as well, and also with the institutions, I would say government institutions in each country that need to do the technical work. At this moment, is there any question from the people present here? Because this is very important. I mean, it's the first time that we have such a clear idea, at least on the short term, that what might happen and what should happen. Or from our online audience, is there any idea, any question for Ms. Shuday? Yes, please, Adiraj, go ahead.
Yes. What is RCC's expectation on the implementation of regional action plan on a common regional market? How much is achieved? What are the expectations until 2024?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Is maybe a little bit difficult to say now kind of a percentage or to enter into many details. But first of all, as was also mentioned before, the signature and the hopefully the entrance into force of the mobility agreements is really very important, as I said, is a very important for the common regional market. But also we had very important other achievements in the past. I mentioned earlier the regional roaming agreement, which have brought many tangible benefits in the ground for the citizens, and we see this in the traffic of data and of phone calls in the region. But also I can also mention the success of the green lanes during the pandemic, which made possible actually that the flow of goods, of health equipments, medicine, and others that were very, very important during the pandemic. So it made it possible the flow of such goods in reasonable times without waiting very much in the borders and without having a lot of what measures that were imposed by the pandemic. We have also a lot of other agreements, very important agreements in the pipeline. We have maybe I can briefly mention some of the agreements.
Let's keep them for later, because these are also very important. But for the moment, we are very much interested into this race. I would say there are 6 athletes, the 6 countries of Western Balkan 6. I would be very, very interested to know who will sign, who will ratify all 3 agreements. The first one, it will be a wonderful sign of good political will. Do you have an indication about this?
Sorry, Ardan, I'm not sure if I heard you very well. Do I have an indication of the timeline or?
Yes, we would like to know who is the first, who has advanced the most, if you have an indication about this. And also we would like to know, I would like to know, is there any time limit for the signature of these agreements? For the adoption, apologies, for the adoption of these agreements.
The time limit is different for, as I said before, it's different for each of the economies because they have their own constitutional framework, they have their own legislative procedures. So it is very difficult for me to, as I said, to give an exact timeline. And I would avoid actually to give an exact timeline because I believe it is up to the Western Balkans economies to finalize their procedures in due time. But as I said, we do have the commitments from all of them, and we are, in our knowledge, they are already started their internal procedures that hopefully will be finalized very soon. But just, okay, I don't want to repeat myself, but I will still have to say that it is, because it is also important, these are other procedural steps that we are taking in parallel, as I said. So at least we won't have any delays once the ratification procedures in each of the economies take place. The agreements can be immediately implementable in the ground.
Thank you very much. And I will immediately continue with our colleague Valeska from Berlin. And I will just say that those 3 agreements, they were technically complete last year, as reported as such by RCC in their 2021 monitoring report. However, something happened this year. And it seems everybody points the fingers to Berlin. Berlin did something to make these technical agreements acquire political will and have the signature of the Western Balkan 6. What did you do, Valeska?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me in this debate. Yeah, I will try not to repeat too much of what has already been said, but I think I would like to start with the second part of the question when it comes to the renewed dynamics of the Berlin process. I think part of what has been really important is that we decided to revisit some of the commitments that had already been made and pay a lot of attention to its implementation, which brings me to those 3 agreements in part. As the colleague from the RCC already said, the agreements had been prepared and almost ready to sign already by the RCC, and I would like to use this opportunity also to thank the RCC for the great work that they have been doing, because we would not have been able to reach this breakthrough without the RCC. What we did do regarding the agreements is that we invited to negotiations in Berlin that were led by Manuel Sarrazin, as was mentioned before, the special representative of the German government for the countries of the Western Balkans. And together with RCC, we addressed the open issues in those agreements and were able to finalize them. And in my view, key to this was putting bilateral issues aside and no longer taking the whole region hostage to bilateral problems. So the agreements have been signed in a way that was accepted and acceptable for all parties. And in my view, this is not only a milestone, as this really serves as the basis for the common regional market. And I can only repeat, I think it is crucially important now that these three agreements are ratified in all countries as quickly as possible so that they can enter into force. Because if we remember, the whole idea behind the Berlin process was to have and to not only support the EU integration of the Western Balkans, but to also deliver very concrete and tangible results to the citizens. And in my view, these agreements are as concrete as it can be. I'm not that pessimistic about ratification. I would agree here also with the colleagues. I think this is clearly in the interest of all citizens in the region. The problem with the agreements was that the text haven't been fully agreed, but now they are, and they are signed. So I really don't see a reason why they shouldn't be implemented. Ambassador Zingraf mentioned the situation between Serbia and Kosovo, but I would argue that since our negotiations were already taking place also against the background of this difficult situation, I would really expect for all parties to continue to put bilateral differences aside in order not to take the region hostage. And the agreements will enter into force as soon as they are ratified in 3 of the parties. I think this is also very important to mention. To maybe also look a bit into the future, and as was mentioned already, there are many more agreements that are already in the making, many of them also relatively ready on the technical side. Just to mention a few examples, we're talking about the recognition of other professional qualifications, but we're also talking about very concrete deliverables such as parcel deliveries or geo-blocking and issues like that, just to mention very, very specific examples. And those agreements still need to be finalized and endorsed in the months to come. But I think now with the 3 agreements that have been signed, we also have a precedence now as to what kind of language is acceptable to all parties. So we really believe that we can now really make a leap forward there. I would like to also mention some of the other results of this year's summit, because I think if we're talking about the Berlin process and the new dynamics that have been created, as was mentioned before, I think it is really important to also look at the other very tangible results to the citizens of the region, especially in the field of energy and energy security, which, as we all know, is a major issue at the moment across Europe. And in that regard, I think the Declaration on Energy Security and Green Transition that has been endorsed by 5 of the 6 Western Balkan leaders in Berlin is very important as well. It looks at the implementation of the green agenda in the energy sector and its decarbonization, another field where we have a very concrete and detailed action plan that, among others, RCC has been working on and is doing a great job in terms of driving the implementation forward. But it also includes the harmonization of crisis and emergency measures, not only regionally, but also with EU member states. So again, also here, we have the concrete links between the results of the Berlin process and the EU integration process of all countries. And part of this includes also the strong support that was announced, and Ambassador Zingraf also mentioned this, by the EU and its member states to support energy security in the region, to show the solidarity that had been lacking initially in the pandemic. If I may remind you, the EU has invited the Western Balkans to join the Common Purchase of Gas, the platform, immediately when it was created. And Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has traveled the region with a substantial support package from the EU. And the Berlin process has, in addition to that, delivered quite a substantial support package also from the German government to not only provide short-term financial support to alleviate fiscal pressures as a result of the energy crisis, but also very substantial funds for clean energy projects and energy transition, thereby also not only trying to alleviate the current crisis, but also support the implementation of the green agenda. Just to mention very briefly a couple of other results that I consider also very important. Foreign Minister Baerbock has launched a partnership with the region to strengthen regional cyber capacities. We have also announced a new fund to support cultural exchanges across the region, which will be a youth culture fund that will complement and enhance the portfolio of RICO's work. I will not be. I will leave the civil society forum to my colleague Christian Hagemann, but maybe just to mention also very briefly that we feel that the role of civil society and youth in the Berlin process is also extremely important, and we were very happy that we were able to welcome delegates of both fora to the foreign ministers meeting and also to the summit. So I think overall this reinvigoration or how did you put it, the new energy in the Berlin process, I think is very much has been a teamwork with the relevant institutions across the region, and I think also a lot of political will on all sides. I would leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valeska. I just will mention some points that attracted my attention. First of all, the many meetings that you have had in Berlin, you and Special Envoy Sarrazin in Berlin, but also in the region, a lot of meetings, meeting people, building trust. What I noticed, and I think it's an amazing strategic development, it's the approach of leaving aside, and I'm slowing now my speech, is leaving aside the bilateral issues so that they do not take hostage the regional cooperation progress. I think it's fantastic. We have also adopted it in our joint work. We look only at the positive side. Problem solving has moved aside a little bit. It is also very important, this setting of precedent of the signature of the 3 agreements, and the fact that there is no reason why their implementation should not continue or be conditioned by what may happen between signatory parts. Thank you very much for that. And now, when we look about ownership that you mentioned as well, we have the privilege and the opportunity to have by our side Ms. Odeta Bartolucci, who is one of the main team members of all this coordination effort that the Albanian government is putting to organize the 3rd trimester of the European Union, because as you know, it will happen in Albania. Everybody will be here. And it's a huge work logistically, content-wise, everything. But what interests us in this moment, and I will start my question with this, how the Western Balkan Summit, but also a little bit what was reached also in Prague in October in the Prague Summit, how they will feed, or how the Albanian how the Albanian hosts will impact, if they can, I would say, what will happen in Albania on the 6th of December in the EU Western Balkan Summit, taking into account what happened in Prague and in Berlin. Odeta, floor is yours.
Thank you, Ardian. Faleminderit për ftesën. Mirëmëngjes e gjithëve. I'm very glad to be here, and dialogue with civil society was in fact one of the main dimensions of Berlin process since its very launch. So it's very important for us to continue this dialogue and have civil society engaged in regional cooperation. Now you mentioned actually 3 stations. We took it from Berlin to Tirana. You mentioned Prague, and of course Berlin process is coming to Tirana again next year. And I think in the context of these landmark events, I think it's very important to reflect on this new energy or the new dynamic of Berlin process and how it can be revamped, how it can be relaunched, so that it can serve the region better, it can integrate the region better in the EU, it can indeed provide a developmental perspective to the region, and how it can do that also in comparison or side to side to the other platforms that you just mentioned. You mentioned the European Political Community, which was just launched a few weeks ago in Prague. And of course, we have now the EU Western Balkan Summit that will be organized in the Council meeting that will be organized in Tirana. And indeed, you said that we won't speak much about what Berlin process is and what it was, but it's important to reflect on how it started. It started, in fact, as the very first political bilateral platform between the EU and the Western Balkans, that bridge between the Thessaloniki summit to a moment when you had a lagging, let's say, a delay of the EU accession process for the countries of the region. So, and that particular moment, as it was mentioned here by other speakers, it was very important, and I think Ambassador Zingraf made the point very eloquently how it brought together the leaders of 6 countries of the Western Balkans that for the first time could sit together at the same table and discuss issues of common interest, including issues of bilateral disputes or unfinished business between parties, but also questions of connectivity, of convergence, of trade, and so on. But now we are in a new moment, and I think it's in this new moment that we are discussing. First, I would like to join the other speakers and express appreciation for the new new German government's commitment to the region, and Berlin process and the deliverables of the summit, I think, are one demonstration of that, and also the visit of the federal president on the 1st of December is also another very important sign of that commitment. As it was mentioned here, indeed, we had a number of 3 agreements, precisely, signed, and these agreements were held hostage of unfinished business between the 2 parties. I wouldn't call it dispute. And in fact, as it was also said, it held hostage regional cooperation in many respects. And it was precisely for that reason that 3 countries of the region starting working on the common regional market agenda to see what could be implemented, what could have more tangible results and more concrete results. And I'm speaking namely here of the Open Balkans. I would call it sub-regional or sub-initiatives, if you like. And the agreement signed in Berlin, 3 of them were signed, either trilaterally or bilaterally, among the parties in the region. What is important, I think, the main merit of this moment is that now all 6 signed these agreements. And the particular merit of, let's say, of the agreement on movement with IDs is that it has a tangible, once it is ratified, it has an immediate positive effect, particularly for citizens of Bosnia and Kosovo and Serbia. Now that will be in an agreement, in an international agreement. So I think that's the main merit of it. But how do we go from there to the next step? And I think the Berlin summit also served as a very good moment, it was a very good opportunity for the leaders to discuss the way ahead, particularly in the context of the current security crisis, of the energy crisis. Some were mentioned here, some of these challenges that we all face. And the main question is how to use this initiative so that the region becomes part of the European Union. And one dimension which was underlined by all leaders, and I think it's of crucial importance in the context of this discussion, is how to improve economic convergence and how to offer and provide a developmental perspective to the region. Now, this was a pillar, in fact, of the Berlin process since the very beginning. It is important to inject new energy into the discussion. And I say this also in the context of a debate which has started before the Brdo summit and is continuing among the leaders, but also at other levels, among the civil society, among experts in the region, of how we can bring the region to integrate gradually in the single market, and how we can implement more swiftly the 4 freedoms of the single market. And I think that's a very important question. It can be a central question of the Berlin process. And it is in line very much with the spirit of the new methodology of enlargement, I think. But the key word is here how to make this process tangible for the citizens, that the citizens feel that even though the accession process, the individual accession trajectories can take a long time, can take longer than you would expect maybe a decade ago or when the Berlin process started, we are working towards, and we have a roadmap to make our countries more similar, our economies more similar to those of the European Union. And here, when I say this, I also have in mind what a number of experts wrote last year, led by a working group under Dusan Relic, of how the difference between, let's say, even countries that have been recently joined the EU, this economic and developmental gap between the Western Balkans and this region has only deepened. And this is very important, I think, in the context, and it becomes even more pertinent question in the context of the current security crisis that we are all living in. The second dimension, or the second, I think, point I would like to bring here is how to re-emphasize and inject new energy into the infrastructure discussion. I know you have been doing work on this since the Berlin process started. I think it's very important to bring infrastructure at the center of Berlin process, of the new relaunched Berlin process. It is important when we discuss about infrastructure to think of it now actually as also a security matter. And here we have in mind discussions, particularly I have in mind some segments that with countries of the region we are actually lobbying to include or to upgrade, let's say, from comprehensive to core European networks like the Corridor 8 and so on. We are working with North Macedonia, with Bulgaria. I only mention this. It might not be very relevant, let's say, to the three agreements that we just mentioned, but it is very important that we have the support and we have political capital also of a country like Germany, who is at the forefront of and who is the initiator of this process, to support our efforts in this direction and to actually share the same vision of how infrastructure has indeed a very important security component in the current moment. I don't mean to be critical. I think it's the time to actually see what we can do and how we can build on the success of the Berlin process. But if we think back again if we think back to let's say the trajectory, the timeline of infrastructure projects, and we have here in mind, let's say the segment of Durrës-Vor railway segment that just started now, the implementation. I remember at that time I was in another capacity still in government, that was that project in 2016. So we are talking for 6 years from the moment the project is won to the moment of starting. And that sort of, for the citizens, you know, this sounds very remote of what regional cooperation is, what connectivity and what infrastructure is, if it takes too long or so long for projects to start implementing. The other, I think, and I'll bring it back to your question about the summit, I think it is also important for us to strengthen regional ownership. As Valeska said, I think it was a great success that all 6 countries made compromises with relation to the language of the text, in relation to what they wanted in, what they wanted out. But the important takeaway is that they were signed. And I agree with Valeska, ratification will take, I don't know, between weeks and months, but it's important that it is that political will was there. And we need to build on that. So I think that's very important, and that is a point we aim to also underline at the summit in Tirana in December, because it is the first time that all EU countries are coming to the region. I wouldn't say are only coming to Tirana, of course that's very important. It is very important, but it is coming. The summit, the EU is coming to the region, and I think that is a very important political message. So the region needs to build on the political ownership of the process of regional cooperation, but also to show credibility. that the engagements, the commitments we have taken are seen through. A very last, if I may, and we can continue this conversation, is that the agenda, and I think that is in connection to regional ownership, the agenda needs to be shaped by the region.
You mean the agenda of the 6th of December?
No, also the agenda of Berlin process.
Right.
The agenda of the 6th of December, we are working, of course, with the cabinet of the President of the EU Council to see what we can put and how we can shape some of the things that are already part of the Council discussion. For us, it will be important that all 6 countries of the region underline the importance of bringing the region closer to the EU, bring the region closer to the EU single market, and making the region part of the common European responses to energy, to cybersecurity, but also offering some perspectives which make the region part of the EU now and not when the individual countries become members, like in the area of innovation, research, industrial development, and so on. So I'll leave it there for now, and I'll be happy to come back to some of these points.
It's perfect. Actually, it was not a provocation when I said to you to shape the agenda of the 6th of December, because I liked very, very much your point on using energy security achievements during the Berlin summit as a kind of an entry door to what will happen here on the 6th. And the fact that on the 8th of November, if I'm not wrong, in Prague, on the 6th of October, there was a meeting of energy ministers from the Western Balkan 6 and also from the 3 new countries, candidate countries. It's a very strong indication of our increased agency, or at least of our politicians. I will stop here. I have plenty of things to say, but I will stop here and open the floor for some short questions to Valeska and also to Odeta. I see Sodiraj's hand, which is written. Anybody from the audience here? Or anybody from Andri? If I see Andri, Sodiraj, Andri, and another person before we do a round? 1, 2, 3, it's sold. Sodiraj, you start.
Thank you. I'll just start with Valeska, but also the question may also go back because the last points that Odeta mentioned are very much in line with what I'm going to want to say. Valeska, I want to go back to what Simonida Kaczarska asked in Berlin, your boss, Sarrazin, Mr. Sarrazin, about can you give a date for the EU integration in Albania, in EU integration of the region. So my question now is on the second part of it's another question. It's not directly related to the EU, but can group dynamics within the Western Balkans develop a certain its own date, or agree about its own date where the region might be? But this should come as initiative from the Western Balkan 6 countries. Because now it's I know that it's very, very difficult that EU gives a date, but you see, the region might have its own date on that. So, and this might also link to the political ownership process and links also with the coming summit and coming summits, if you want, and the Berlin process. So development of group dynamics, it's really very important to go beyond everyday politics, because we are talking about things going from one day to another, from one country to another. We have this problem, this agreement. Now, let's see big. But to see big as a region, notwithstanding what EU thinks. EU has its own job to do. We have our own job to do. That's my...
Right, so a date and ownership. Andri, please keep it short.
Yes, thank you for the meeting today. Actually, I have a question for Mrs. Odeta. Referring to the infrastructure issue she raised in a background of a sustainable infrastructure, is the government considering the involvement of civil society engaged in the environmental protection or other environmental fields? And I also have a comment. I invite the Mrs. Odeta and the government to consider the suggestion and recommendation from the civil society that we brought at the forum of Berlin process. Thank you.
This is an excellent point, which I will not ask publicly right now. Who has read the recommendations that were produced by the Civil Society Summit at the Berlin process? I will not ask it publicly. But is there any other question? No. Okay, so let's go. A date. Will you give us a date, Valeska? To Sotirais?
That was not the question, no. We're not expecting. How would you, as someone representing Mr. Sarrazin and, let's say, in a way, EU integration, would welcome an initiative from the region to produce a date? No, I'm not asking for a date. I'm asking that how this process, internal Western Balkan 6 process, may lead, potentially might lead to a certain date, regional date, but it will be our, not yours. But what is your perception of the thing?
Which brings me perfectly to the question of ownership for Odeta, and afterwards infrastructure, both of you. Valeska, floor is yours.
Thank you. I think that positive dynamics in the region can go a long way in speeding up also the integration process. I mean, let me start by saying that I think we're extremely happy that we finally saw the opening of accession negotiations for Albania and North Macedonia. I think it's key that the EU has been able to finally take that step. I think it will be key also for the EU to take a positive decision on visa liberalization for Kosovo soon and deliver on its side of the process. But I think, I mean, if we look at the latest country reports when it comes to the reform processes in the region, I think we can all agree that a lot more could have been done and hasn't been. So as I said, I think any positive dynamic in the region when it comes to regional integration, when it comes to jointly working on EU standards, can go a long way of speeding up the process. So that would be my take on that.
Thank you. Odeta?
Yes, I think I mentioned how important that regional cooperation is, regional ownership is, both for agenda setting, but also for implementation. And you know, when we speak about the inclusion of the region in all the common EU responses to the energy crisis, to challenges of cybersecurity, to health, which became even more important in the context of pandemics and post-pandemics, I think here is very important that the region speaks confidently, not only jointly, but also with confidence. I know Ambassador Zingraf made a point here about repeating what is important to us. And I think that's part of basically of that confidence, that what we need must be there in the menu, in the agenda, because we are part of the continent, we are part of Europe, and we have shouldered jointly some of the recent challenges of the continent. And it is very, very important that we work jointly. I mentioned the work we have done also with North Macedonia and Serbia in implementing parts and some of the commitments of common regional market, particularly in that moment when cooperation between all six seemed to be stalled or was stalled for political reasons. So it's important, the same amount of energy, so to speak, we also invest in bilateral G2G cooperation with our neighbors, with Kosovo, but also with North Macedonia. We only had our the most recent G2G with North Macedonia last week, where again, part of the agenda were exactly the same questions: energy, infrastructure, cybersecurity, mobility, turning our border crossing points into one-stop shops, single window and one-stop shops. These are part of what we do in the region with all countries, with all parties in the region. but again, discussing regional ownership in the context of EU enlargement, I think here it's important to emphasize that EU accession is a merit-based process, and it will remain so. We expect it to remain so. We don't expect something to change despite the current security context, or no matter how much we say that as a region we need to join the EU. I think that's very much a merit-based process, and for the sake of the citizens, of the societies and domestic institutions, it should remain so. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a sort of more finite plan or a roadmap of what we want to do, let's say, in relation to infrastructure, what we want to do jointly in relation to the single market, or to gradual integration in some of the policy areas which are important to us, and which might not be obvious policies, like some of them I mentioned, like, of course, industrial development, but also research and innovation, higher education. Some areas which have the potential to transform societies and economies now, and can start to do that now.
Thank you very much. And before going to the infrastructure issue question that was asked, I just want to mention, just crossed my mind, that just to share with you the role that civil society has in the infrastructure. On the 16th of November, CDI, so the organization for which I work for, with its partners in EU, deposed an amendment to the European Parliament to ask for the inclusion of the Corridor 8 into the core network. And we made it. Now we are kind of lobbying now with the Council and with other commissions, but this is also a sign of the commitment that can come from non-governmental actors, and which responds a little bit, or kind of deals a little bit with what Andrew said. But I mean, regarding the national governments, I guess is another component.
Yes, I think that's a very important question. We have revitalized this platform for partnership in the framework of EU accession process. And I think that's important. Organizations which focus, and that part of civil society which focuses on infrastructure, but also the green agenda, have a louder and more active voice in the context of the acquis related to these areas. But I think it's also important in the context of the implementation of the green agenda, and in collaboration with RCC, that we work more closely with civil society and include civil society in this regional platform, and discuss on how to implement the green agenda in ways which sort of respond to the needs and to specificities of our countries and economies, but also in ways which make our economies more sustainable.
Thank you, Leda, very much. So, and now we have come to what was not mentioned on purpose before. Valeska said that we'll discuss by our colleague Christian Hagemann, and also by Jana Juzova from Europeum. This year we have had an amazing activity of civil society and think tanks around the issues of enlargement, the European political community, and on top of everything of the Berlin process. It has been a huge travel time, preparation time, meeting time, and some very good things have come out of it. And I will start this last part of the discussion with our panelists, with Mr. Hagemann, asking him what were, according to your assessment, Christian, what were the main takeaways from the Western Balkans CSO Summit in 2022? We know what are the official ones. We want to know what are the secret ones.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I hope you all can hear me. Thank you for the invitation. It feels good to be back in Tirana, and I'm really happy to report here from the Civil Society Forum that we had the pleasure to be organizing as Southeast Europe Association together with the Aspen Institute and supported by the Federal Foreign Office. And I'm not sure if I can tell you about the very secret results, but I will try. If you look at the takeaways, I would like to start with the mood of the event, which was really excellent, really engaged. And I would say after such a long time of online events, and when everybody is talking about a relaunch of the process, you don't really know what to expect, but people seemed really happy to be meeting again and very eager to participate, and also supportive of the Berlin process. So if we go a step further and look at the results, we dealt with 6 different issue areas that also went beyond the issues of the summit. We focused on energy transition, environmental protection and sustainable economy, climate change, disinformation or information disorder as we called it, EU integration and infrastructure investments. And these are of course vastly different policy areas, but I will try to focus on 2 aspects of the results of the Civil Society Forum here, which from my point of view matter for all these areas. And the one is that CSOs underlined that the EU should hold governments of the region accountable to implement what has been promised or signed up to in the past. And just to give a few examples that were mentioned, this means agreements in the energy area and the energy community. This means implementing the green agenda and legislation regarding biodiversity, nature protection and anti-pollution legislation. And CSOs also underlined the importance of ending media capture as a crucial source of information disorder in the region. And I think this pretty well connects to something that Valeska said also before, that that their approach was to work with what was already there and try to push it a step further to implement it. And I think the mood at the forum also went into this direction. But there were, of course, also clearly formulated demands and recommendations by civil society going beyond already existing commitments. You can find all the details in our publication that will be available soon. I will just give a few main examples here. These are, for example, to increase the financing for climate mitigation measures, to involve civil society in infrastructure planning from project identification to audit, so into the entire policy cycle, to work on citizen-focused solutions for bilateral issues that block the enlargement process and also other processes that are blocked by it, and for the EU to prioritize fundamental rights, democracy and the rule of law in the process. So this in a nutshell would be it for now.
Christian, thank you very much. But let me discover a little bit one of what is happening behind the curtains. Something that I personally and also a lot of my colleagues loved about this summit was the preparation phase and the follow-up. Basically, but was not seen from the outside, and especially now about the follow-up. And we like the follow-up because it means that we will meet more regularly and the impact of what we decided will be felt with the decision makers in Germany or in EU. Do you think you can share with us what you guys are doing in Berlin or in Brussels to give us access to decision-making mechanisms?
Yes, of course. So I think that the question goes a bit into the direction of what impact can come from this forum and from the results that were achieved at the Civil Society Forum. And we, of course, hope for an impact, but for this, it is important that people in the first place know about the recommendations and know that policymakers know about it. And we had several ideas included in order to enable people to learn about the results. In the first place, of course, we invited people from member state governments and from Western Balkan governments to participate in the forum, to discuss with us the results in the actual panels at the event in Berlin. The results were then also presented, you know this very well, Adrian, at the meeting of Ministers of Foreign Affairs and in the Kanzleramt of the day of the summit, as Valeska also already mentioned. So important opportunities to underline the role of civil society in the process here. And what is for us very important, and this is what Adrian just mentioned, the follow-up process, so the post-summit phase in a sense of summit of civil society. We are currently scheduling follow-up meetings at the working level of ministries and other institutions to give our working group rapporteurs. We have one rapporteur or some working groups have 2 rapporteurs for each topic, to give them the possibility to talk about their issues with the experts and to get their recommendations into the policy process at an early stage by talking to those people who work on the sides of the governments in the ministries and other institutions in these processes. So this is an idea to somehow informally strengthen the role of civil society in a way that they have greater visibility for their results, going beyond the main events and going closer to the working level.
Christian, thank you very much. And this is what I think was important to hear from you. It's what are you doing, guys, to get the recommendations into the policy process? So, and which kind of goes into the line of getting civil society more engaged, not only as a watchdog, but as a shaper, as an agent with agency into the policy-making process, and also, as Odeta mentioned, also into the project cycle management for big projects, for big infrastructure projects. Thank you very much. I will give the floor now to Jana Juzova, who will put what we discussed into the larger context of enlargement. And afterwards, I will open the floor for any questions about these two issues, but also about any relevant and related issue that falls into the subject of this conversation. Jana, you guys, you were organizing in Prague. Fantastic hosts, by the way, thank you. This summit with think tanks and EU think tanks and the civil society organization from WB6, and placing it squarely, because it's within the Czech presidency of the EU, placing it squarely within the enlargement framework. What are the contact points between Berlin process and enlargement? How they interact, how they can profit, how they can help each other?
Okay, thank you very much, Adrian, for the introduction. Thank you so much for the invitation. We touched upon it before, how important it is that now we are seeing this cooperation and more coordination between civil society and think tanks in terms of these different fora and different conferences. And I'm very happy to see that we managed to kind of establish some sort of follow-up and closer communication between your connectivity forum, our think tank forum in Prague, and also the Berlin process, civil society and think tank forum in Berlin recently. And regarding this, our logic behind our think tank forum was actually in a way inspired by the Berlin process and the practice of organizing or connecting the civil society organizations and the think tanks with the political process and political steering. And we realized, especially when we were cooperating and communicating with the Czech government in preparation of the Czech presidency of the Council of the European Union, and regarding the priorities and mostly in our agenda, which relates to EU enlargement process and Western Balkans, we realized that while there is much talk in terms of the EU enlargement process about the importance of partnership with civil society in the region and connecting them closer to the process itself in terms of monitoring, but also in terms of policy shaping, the actual practical examples are rather missing and they are insufficient. So our logic behind this was actually built upon this need and the good practice which is established and being strengthened, I would say, throughout the years in the Berlin process, and actually try to connect the civil society also with the political process of the EU enlargement, which is sometimes criticized for not being transparent enough and not being inclusive enough and focused just on the political leaders. So we also built upon the reality, and of course we all know the Russian invasion of Ukraine changed a lot in terms of how we think about European continent in general, how the EU approaches its surrounding countries and regions. And we mentioned the European political community, but also there seems to be a new momentum in terms of the enlargement process as such. Some gradual steps have been taken. We see more communication between the ministers and at the highest level in areas of common interest, but in order to actually really build upon this momentum that we are seeing here now, and to most importantly sustain the momentum beyond this year and the Czech EU presidency, which is very active in this area, but also actually to keep it going and keep enhancing this cooperation also under the Swedish, the Spanish and Belgian presidencies. we need to communicate more and create a joint pressure. So also this was our logic when we were preparing our forum. So we invited not only the civil society organization and think tank representatives, but also civil servants from the Czech Republic, from Spain, or from Belgium, in order to kind of, to be honest, lobby and also to advocate for the importance of this continued dialogue and cooperation also beyond the Czech presidency in the upcoming years. And when it comes to the synergies that you asked me about between the Berlin process and the EU integration process, I believe this is still some potential which we need to tap into much more, because it is, in my point of view, what I'm saying is that we have many initiatives and different platforms and tools how the EU or the EU member states engage with the region of Western Balkans. Of course, there is the EU enlargement policy, the Berlin process, but also activities of individual EU member states through their embassies and their special programs, supporting mostly the rule of law, democracy, human rights respect, and so on. And what we are missing is more coordination and more building upon the synergies and the overlaps which are existing. So even during our think tank forum, for example, one of the topical clusters was devoted to the green agenda and energy transition in the region, which is, of course, naturally one of the huge topics under the Berlin process. When we talk also about gradual integration, which is it was one of the main messages that came out from our think tank forum, that we actually really need to do our, put our maximum effort into how we can integrate the countries with the European Union immediately in these very critical agendas like the green and energy. But also in terms of connectivity and so on. So here again, like we should be thinking more about how we can connect the process which is governed or led by the DG NEAR and the presiding country of the European Union with the Berlin process, which is very intergovernmental. And of course, it's a rather closed and small club when it comes to the membership or how many countries from the European Union are actually involved in this. So in this regard, I saw as a positive step the fact that the Czech Minister of Foreign Affairs was attending the meeting where the conclusions from the Berlin process civil society and think tank forums were presented, which again at least builds some kind of level of coordination and cooperation. But we need to think about how we can actually engage more and connect more the Berlin process summits and the process which is actually led just by a small group of EU member states with the rest of the European Union and other initiatives, and also with other countries which are generally supportive of not only EU enlargement process in general, but also the Western Balkans more specifically. Because another thing which is maybe important to mention from our think tank forum is that the context of this changed geopolitical environment and the war in Ukraine quite naturally reorganized the priorities of the European Union, but honestly, even the priorities of the Czech presidency of the European Union, because now the EU is largely reacting to what is happening in our eastern neighborhood. And all of us, the candidate countries from the Western Balkans, the civil society, but also the countries and organizations which are supportive of Western Balkans within the European Union, now have to be working much more strongly together to maintain the momentum and to emphasize why the EU should not be losing its interest in the Western Balkans, but the war actually should serve as an argument why it should be much more engaged right now with the Western Balkans as well. And for this reason, I believe we just really need to look for more continuity. On one hand, we are seeing this now being established at the civil society and think tanks level through this event and many other events which were happening now, but we also need to jointly lobby more with other EU member states to actually keep the momentum going and not to lose it, because the Czech Republic is doing quite significant efforts, because the Western Balkans and EU enlargement policy is one of its traditional foreign policy priorities. It was expected that it will be one of the priorities of the presidency, but this might not be the case for other countries which will hold the presidency in the upcoming years. And for that reason, we just really need to collaborate more and lobby more together.
Well, that's perfect. I mean, this idea of building up on the best, let's say, points or the achievements of the Berlin process to transfer them into the enlargement is fantastic. And I'll just build up on your latest idea to this Czech suggestion of, let's say, making almost like a customary this consultation of the presidency of the EU Council, the presidency of the term, of the semester, with civil society organizations. I mean, something that that it was done in Prague and was mentioned in Prague. I will not say more because it was under Chatham House rules, but I believe that it is a very valid and useful suggestion that may be, and we would strongly suggest to our Swedish colleagues to take it into account during the preparation of the agenda of their, and also the Spanish afterwards, of their presidency. So, regarding, I will stop here for the moment. Thank you very much, Jana, for your contribution, and open the floor to any comment, suggestion, declaration. Right? Oh, anyone?
Ardian,
Yes?
do you hear me? I'm sorry, I cannot.
Jelica, yes, we hear you and I recognize your voice.
Yeah, sorry, I cannot put my camera on, but I was inspired, especially with what Jana said. Three issues. First of all, we have to improve communication about Berlin process. And there is no appropriate spillover effect to the local level in our countries, in the Western Balkans. Generally, we have problem with decentralization in our countries, local governance, which is very important for the process of democratization. We have problem with domestic entrepreneurs. We have to encourage domestic entrepreneurs much more. We are focused on foreign investments, but we are not focused on domestic investments appropriately. We have to prepare ourselves for the EU funds in that respect through the decentralization process, NUTS levels. And this is also very important for regional development, for local development. So this area hasn't been approached at all, except during the Polish chairmanship of the Berlin process. They organized the conference in Rzeszów, and they underlined exactly these issues. And I think it's very important for our region to learn about that and not to exclude local level from all strategic agendas. Second thing, how to connect better the DG NEAR and Berlin process. Berlin process has a freedom not being institutionalized, having much more flexible format, and that is why it is much more imaginative. It's a freedom to collect ideas, but the Berlin process supplied DG NEAR with ideas, and DG NEAR absorbed a lot of things being prepared by the Berlin process. It is visible in the new methodology and these flagship initiatives. Most of it was taken from the Berlin process. And finally, regarding the interested countries, who EU member countries plus Great Britain, who are taking part in the Berlin process format. If you analyze the structure of these countries carefully, most of them are the space of natural gravitation of our countries, Western Balkans, Central Europe and Mediterranean, it means Italy, Greece. So there is a logic in the membership, in the structure of the cluster of EU member countries that are taking part in the Berlin process. So somehow it should be in a proper way presented to those countries that are not interested for our region, that do not have vested interest in our region, how to attract them, through which means, leverages. Indicative is this conference held by Norwegian government representatives and companies with Western Balkan leaders in Belgrade dealing with energy issues. So we should think about how to give more space probably for some other countries to become supporters of the Berlin process and to become more involved. As I would like to underline again, Berlin process is very creative. And I thank very much to all people being involved in keeping this initiative alive. And especially, I can see the new energy having in mind a lot of young German people involved in the Berlin process and taking care about its organization and about its conceptual format. So many thanks to the young German colleagues that we had opportunity to cooperate with during the Civil Society and Think Tank Forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisa. Now, I mean, as we announced at the beginning, we had the Ambassador Zingraf who had to leave with his huge overcharged agenda, but with an even more overcharged agenda is Odeta here with us. If there is any question now that you have for the Albanian host of the 2022 EU WB6 summit of the 6th of December, and also on the organizer of the Western Balkan Summit in 2023, it's now or never. Okay, Alba.
Thank you, Ardian. Alba Brika, head of local branch office in Albania, RICO. It's actually more of a comment rather than a question. I just wanted to state that please consider RICO as building on that regional political ownership that we mentioned before, as an organization that is actually a bridge or a common ground, if you like, that brings the product of the Berlin process, what was one of the products of what can be achieved from this process, but also as an organization that brings the interest of the region, showing how invested the region is and what it wants to deliver. And thank you to also Mrs. Valeska for actually mentioning a new window that RICO can explore to engage with young people, which is the Cultural Fund. So just to state that the interest of young people from the region is there to build the whole process, but also to show that that there is an interest and there is engagement and there is a will to push this process forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alba, for your statement. We need to bring youth is there. We need to bring the youth there, and to state it. If there is no other question, I will ask a very direct question to Odeta about a date first. When you plan to come up with, let's say, with a paper or with the first meeting of CSO representatives from the region vis-a-vis of the Albania's role of host and coordinator of the Western Balkan Summit 2023. We know you have a vision. Albania has shown a very strong ownership for the Berlin process and for the regional cooperation. We hope and we are also convinced that it will continue also with the engagement of national governments with civil society organization. But better, I mean.
A date, I'll start from this. We don't have yet a date. In fact, we have thought it might very likely be in the first 3 semester, but we will discuss this also with the German government when we can plan. And I think once the EU Western Balkan meeting or council meeting in December ends, then we will concentrate fully on the organization of the next Berlin summit. I think you're right. Albania has been very much at the forefront of regional cooperation, but also has been very proactive in shaping the agenda, the policy agenda, and will continue to do that. And I think some of the themes that I already underlined and that were underlined here by previous speakers are very important to bring to the table and to see how we can integrate more swiftly as a region to the single market, how we can use this initiative to also approximate the acquis in certain policy areas, implement the green agenda, and also the declaration that was already agreed at the Berlin summit on energy, and also capitalize our efforts on youth innovation, higher education. I think these are some of the key pillars that we'll be working on. Like I said, it is very important that the region shapes the agenda, but that doesn't mean that we do not need the other EU member states on board. It's very important as part of our efforts to integrate the region to the single market that we enhance the efforts and cooperation with member states that are our neighbors. And I think here it was previously mentioned the initiative of green lanes, what we are doing with countries like Greece and Italy, but also with other countries that are bordering with our neighbors. It's very important to have these countries as champions of regional cooperation, as partners of the Berlin process, but also use cooperation with them as entry point or stepping stone towards the integration of the region to the single market.
Basically build up on best cases. Thank you very much. We know that you have a very busy agenda and you have stayed with us for all this time. I mean, you can leave whenever you decide. Yes. Thank you very much, Falem Deric. I have a question for Ms. Schütay and also a question for Ms. Eck. But before I'm asking again, is there any question from the people here or from the people that are online? No. Okay. So for Ms. Schütay, will RCC come up with any document or with a plan of its cooperation with civil society organizations with regard of the 3 agreements or other agreements that you mentioned that are on the pipeline? Will you come up with, or will you adopt, because you have a strategy of working with civil society, will you adopt and adapt it accordingly to take into account implementation policy making?
Thank you, Ardian, for the question. For the moment, I cannot give an exact answer to this question, unfortunately, but what I can assure you is that RCC is always open to work and to cooperate with the civil society. We did so for the Green Agenda, and I'm pretty sure that we will collaborate also in the framework of these 3 mobility agreements, but also other agreements that are in the pipeline. But I cannot for the moment give you an exact date or an exact indication when this can happen. But rest assured, as I said, that we are absolutely very open to cooperate with civil society, and we see it as definitely an added value in this process.
Perfect. So I see this as I'm translating. RCC, it's inviting civil society organizations all over Western Balkans to come up with proposals of cooperation into how to monitor and help the implementation of the 3 agreements. Am I correct?
This is a very nice proposal, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. The second, thank you, Rita. At least you will hear from us, at least, about this with the follow-up. Valeska, when are you planning to come up with something written about the German, let's say, engagement strategy or vision on the Berlin process? I mean, there is a declaration, which is very, very clear, very useful. There is, we know what has to be done, but in the best German tradition, it needs to be also followed up with, I don't know, I mean, some action plans, some measures. I know that you don't have a budget, but maybe some EU budget, and not only from DG NEAR, but also from the line DGs, can be indicated as useful as well. But are you planning some written documents, that we can use as a base?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Do you mean looking forward in terms of how the Berlin process will continue? Any written document or what?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Sorry, no, no, there is no plan to have a written document on the future of the Berlin process. I mean, for now, we are very happy that the Albanian government has agreed to host the next summit of the Berlin process. I agree with Odeta. I think regional ownership and strengthening regional ownership is very important. And this is also why the process will return to the region after it was already jointly hosted by North Macedonia and Bulgaria in 2020. I think what is also important to underline is that this does not mean that we are pulling out in any way. We will continue to provide our support. But I would agree the implementation and ownership lies with the region. And I think Odeta also mentioned the credibility and the responsibility for commitments taken. And I can only applaud that. I think this is a very important aspect. I think that in the next 2 weeks, the focus will very much lie on the preparations for the EU Western Balkan Summit in Tirana. But after the summit, as Odeta already mentioned, we will be in close contact and cooperation with our Albanian partners for the preparations of next year's Berlin Process Summit. There are many initiatives that will certainly be continued also next year that were already mentioned before. I mean, there is the action plan for the implementation of the Green Agenda. There is the action plan for the implementation of the Common Regional Market. I think we should all jointly continue working on that, not only from summit to summit, but obviously also in the meantime. As I mentioned, the 3 mobility agreements that were signed are only the beginning, and I hope that we can see quite a bit of progress on the common regional market also between the summits. So I don't think we should only be thinking of the summit itself. As I said, the German government will stay engaged in the Berlin process. It will continue to support these processes in the meantime, and we are ready to also support and help the Albanian government in the organization of the upcoming summit. If you allow me, I would also like to briefly comment on the connection between the Berlin process and the EU enlargement agenda and other initiatives. I mean, first, I think I fully agree. I think there is a need for a connection there, but I think it also very strongly exists. I think Jelica mentioned that there are several initiatives that come from the Berlin process, but have become part of the EU agenda, like, for example, the connectivity agenda, also the implementation of the Green Agenda in part lies there. This is also why we invited not only the Czech EU presidency to the summit and the foreign ministers meeting in Berlin, but also Council President Charles Michel and Commission President Ursula von der Leyen were at the summit. So I think, I mean, both in terms of institutional links, but also in terms of topical links, they are there. And there are many other examples of gradual cohesion that are closely linked to the EU accession process that also derive from the Berlin process. So Odeta mentioned the green lanes, for example. We have the work on the roaming agreement that the RCC is doing, not only to have it as a regional roaming agreement, but to gradually also lower the roaming cost with the EU. We have the energy community, for example, in the field of energy. So I think there are many examples for that, and I think this is part of what is important also about the Berlin process, that it is providing support also to the overall, let's say, cohesion with the EU, but also integration into the EU.
I'm very, very happy to hear the word cohesion coming up regularly into this debate. I mean, it appeared for the first time, I mean, publicly in the Prague summit less than a month and a half ago, and now it's, we hear it regularly, and we believe here in Tirana that at least for the 6 Western Balkan countries, we should shift little by little from the enlargement fatigue towards the cohesion energy. And it will, but this is the issue for another debate. What I take from Valeska's intervention is that first the agenda has to come up from the region, which is fantastic. We have plenty of ideas, we have energy, and now we have shown that we have ownership. The in-between summits, the period and its management is extremely important, and it's indeed something that is cruelly missed to the previous phases of the Berlin process. And also the complementarity with enlargement, which is true, it's very good. I mean, it has been happening in the political domain. Now it needs to extend to the technical, to the sector side, and also to the budgets. Also, this is why we are militating for project selection. Projects, I mean, what we are militating is that the Berlin process that has injected this political will, or this very strong political will that comes from the heads of states and governments, is reflected, and not very late, into clear projects and clear policies. Yep, I guess we have advanced quite quickly, and this is one of the things that happen when you have extremely good panelists and also a moderately good moderator. I think I will open the floor for the last round of questions or statements. If there is, yes,
Just a brief comment. So what my takeaway from this discussion, which was really very fruitful, I think it's, I heard from representative of RCC, it was really very good idea, which should get promoted, and that's the involvement of parliaments in the Western Balkan 6 cooperation. Because you see, working on national agendas and regional agendas, probably it needs political consensus. And from the parliament, political consensus, it's much more easier to get developed than through a kind of government approach only. So this is something which I think should get strengthened and consolidated further in the future. That's my comment.
And I think that this very moment, if I understood you well, this very moment of the ratification of these 3 agreements into national parliaments would be a perfect entry point for bigger engagement and, let's say, impactful engagement of civil society into this with the parliaments as well.
In fact, I'm not even referring to these agreements. I'm referring to generally the process, because generally the process, it's one of the things that was very Jelin mentioned is outreaching. And outreaching society, it's better coming from the parliament than from the government. So in addition to civil society and other actors.
Thank you, Sodirai. So if there is no other question or statement, or...
Can I, sorry, Ardian, can I just...
Yes, please, Yorida, go ahead. I cannot, sorry to let you out. I just, it's far away and I don't have my best glasses. You can see that I keep moving them, you know. So please, yeah, intervene.
No, just a quick comment. I'm really happy that our idea to involve more with the parliaments is welcome. And just to inform you that actually RCC has been doing this for the past 2 years. And currently we are also working very closely with them to also assess, let's say, their knowledge on the common regional market, and also not only of the parliaments, but also the technical staff of the parliaments. So also to prepare, like, let's say, a training needs assessment for the members of the parliaments and the technical staff related to the common regional market, but also to other very important regional cooperation processes. So just to update for this. Thanks.
Well, this is, thank you. Thank you. This is all very good and very useful and very actionable information that we are receiving right now. And I'm sure that many of those points will be followed up. So I don't want to keep you longer than is necessary. And I think that we will close this, this event, this roundtable, and we will close it by doing in the inverse round, talking with our panelists, leaving them the floor. And you guys, you have to respond to one question, which is the same for all of you. Given that the reason that why we gathered this panel together, it was to know what will happen during the implementation. And given the fact that you come from organizations that have been involved directly or are involved directly with this thing, the question is, in the quality of a representative of your organization, what did you take away from this debate? And do we have any suggestion for us? So one question with two components. I will start with Jana, and afterward it's Christian. Odeta is not here, but we are neighbors in Tirana. We will ask her and let you know with Valeska and then with Yorida. Jana, floor is yours. What did you took out and what do you suggest to us?
What for me stood out as one of the most important messages, and maybe with positive surprise, was the regional ownership, which was mentioned many times, and how Albania, in this case, and hopefully other countries of the region in the future, are standing up for themselves and taking the lead in the process. And also the ambition for setting the agenda. And here I think when we talk about cohesion and about deepening economic integration of the Western Balkans into the European Union, whether be it through the Berlin process and the gradual integration into the single market, or through the bridging of the gap by early access to various structural funds of the European Union, then what I would say would be the main message from me is how important the inclusion of civil society organizations in the monitoring will be, because the European Commission, the main monitoring body, it has only limited capacities, and we still have to rely on the people on the ground who actually, it's in a way their money in the game and their interest in the game to not only monitor but also set the agenda and basically keep the governments on track.
I like this idea of having skin in the game. And it's true, we are the only ones that have skin in the game.
And maybe, Adrian, if I may just one more thing, because I didn't say it before, and I think this is an important component from the EU member states' point of view, because now we just don't have any consensus among the EU member states on where the enlargement process should head and so on. And I think this, improved monitoring capacities and in terms of the funds are actually spent in line with rule of law standards and democratic standards of the European Union would be sort of a guarantee towards the skeptical EU member states.
Perfect, and this rejoins what Sotir said in the very beginning. I mean, if you don't give us a date, we will impose you to give us a date, or we'll decide about the date ourselves. Thank you, Anna. Christian.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Thank you also for this very interesting discussion and the different perspectives mentioned here. And during my statement, I said that at the Civil Society Forum, we went beyond the topics of the actual summit. But in the end, I also feel that eventually many things are still connected. So today it was often mentioned that we have now tangible results and that this matters a great deal for citizens of the region. And I think if you look at other issues we covered, for example, the issue of disinformation, it is very important to produce good news in the first place in order to reach the citizens and to not offer like the basis for bad information or also disinformation. And I think we're heading into this direction now. We started the way and we have now tangible results and are of course looking forward to more results to achieve that has been lacking in the past years, and that is the credibility of the EU. And I think there's a very good opportunity now to use all these formats to reinstate the credibility of the EU against the backdrop of Russia's aggression against Ukraine and against a free Europe, if you want to put it like this. And as a suggestion, I would rightly join Jana in what she said in her first statement to say that that we should keep connecting and pushing together for progress, together with the countries that are willing to support the enlargement process, the organizations that are willing and interested in pushing this forward. Also having a look at how to discuss with the countries that are skeptical at the moment and to address their concerns. And we, of course, stand ready for this and continue this with you. Thank you.
Christian, thank you very much. I want to underline this important role of credibility of the EU, and I will also add, and we have discussed about it together, about increasing the legitimacy of the enlargement process as well. And I also take note of this coalition of the willing. At the end of the day, this is what matters. Valeska?
I think I would like to start by noticing that it used to be much more difficult in debates on enlargement in the Western Balkans to end these debates on a positive note, and somehow it hasn't really been that difficult today. And for me, this really is good news that I'm taking from here. I think Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has led to a situation in which we see more engagement of the EU in the Western Balkans. I think we have seen this as well, but obviously all of this is a two-way street, which is also why I'm very happy that we talked so much about regional ownership as well. And I think it is equally important for the region to produce good news as it is for the EU to deliver on their promises. And those of you who know me from my previous live might not be surprised when I say this now, but I also would like to thank civil society organizations across the region and obviously also in EU member states for the important input. Keep pushing your governments, keep insisting on implementation. And also I can also say from our perspective, I can speak for Manuel Sarrazin, but also for others in the German government. We are always open for good ideas and for your input, which is also why we were so happy that it was possible to include delegates from the fora in not only the foreign ministers meeting and the summit. So keep up the good work, and we look forward also to hearing from you.
And you will. And we'll be very happy to continue and build up on our cooperation. And I just want to underline one thing which is beautiful, and I have not heard it since a long, long time. The region has started producing good news. This is good. And we feel vindicated in our efforts to kind of skip it, to call it Southeast Europe 6 and no more Western Balkans, but this is another debate. And Yorida, we started with you, we will finish with you. You have been behind these 3 agreements, you have been the engine. You had a huge, let's say, work done, and now you have even a bigger work during the implementation. Was it useful to spend 2 hours here with us? Of course, you'll say yes, but we want to know why. And,
absolutely, yes. And thank you very much for the invitation once again, because it's really, really very important to attend this time, the types of roundtables, and thank you for bringing everyone together. And thank you also for the good words for the work of the RCC in coordinating the mobility agreements. Well, my main takeaways would be the appetite that exists for an increased regional ownership, and this is absolutely great news, and also the appetites for all inclusiveness of the process. And another takeaway from my side is that the regional cooperation process can make proper sense only if it is followed by early integration EU single market policies. And in concluding, I would like to quote you, because I really like what you said earlier, that it is time to move from enlargement fatigue to cohesion energy. So that would be my main takeaways. Thank you once again to you and to everyone for this very useful roundtable.
Thank you. And we will finish with the phrase, moving from enlargement fatigue to cohesion energy. Thank you very much, all of you, for being with us here, people that were present, people that were with us online. This will be, I think, not our last event, but among the last, but we will keep you posted. It is really great to debate about those issues. It will be even better to see them implemented and make them impactful on the ground. For the people that are present, there is a small lunch prepared outside. It is lunchtime. For people that are online, we owe you, when you come to Tirana next time, a drink, a lunch, or or whatever, or sweet, or coffee. Have a fantastic, very good second half of Wednesday, and see you next time.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you.